Welcome to our session on family partnerships, sources of reading difficulty. Our colleagues and partners at the Michigan Alliance for Families surveyed families, parents, and caregivers about topics of interest. Michigan's MTSS Technical Assistance Center responded to their requests by creating sessions specifically designed for families. If you're joining us as an educator, please put on your family hat and think about your own children, grandchildren, nieces, or nephews for our session today. To find our session materials, you can go to MiMTSSTAC.org. You can also look under Professional Learning when you get there. When you get to Professional Learning, you can scroll down to Session Materials. When you get to Session Materials, you can type in Sources of, Sources of Reading Difficulty, and that will bring up Family Partnerships, Sources of Reading Difficulty, Places Where Reading Breaks Down. In this document or on the web page, you can see lots of documents. So you can see our presentation, our resources, you can see definitions, and you can see some further information there. Go ahead and navigate to our page and go ahead and access our resources before you get started. Once you get to our website, you can also find an additional link to our electronic resources in our electronic Google folder. So in that Google folder, you'll see copies of our PowerPoint for today. You'll find a document giving you definitions and giving you some examples. You'll find a resource document giving you lots and lots of resources and videos that you can connect to. You'll also see some information from the IES practice guide. It's a tip for supporting reading skills at home for families. You can also see some different bookmarks that give you some reading routines that you can read at home. You'll also see that we have the simple view of reading, a short description of that. You'll also see a Spanish version of some of the bookmarks that we have here and some information on advocating for your child. So go ahead and make sure that you have your resources, a scrap paper, pencil, pen, something to capture your reflections and thought as we go forward. Just a quick note about our Creative Commons license. You can share or adapt our materials today for nonprofit use, but please give the TA Center credit and show where the changes have been made. Quick disclaimer about our curricula and intervention programs. You might see examples that run through our session today or other sessions that you attend. Just remember that any examples are for instructional purposes only and don't necessarily constitute an endorsement by the TA Center or the Michigan Department of Education. And to see a list of those approved literacy curricula and intervention programs, you can go to the Committee for Literacy Achievement High Quality Literacy Materials Grant at the link there. There's also the same disclaimer for literacy screening and progress monitoring. If you'd like to see more about those, you can go to the MDE page or Michigan Department of Education page, the K-12 Literacy and Dyslexia. Our purpose today is to welcome families of all configurations, cultures, and languages into partnerships around literacy as we deepen understanding, support each other's skills, share resources. We view speaking multiple languages as a strength, and we invite you to click on closed captioning for this video and choose the language that you prefer. You'll also find some Spanish versions of some of the handouts in the electronic folder. After today, we'll understand more about where reading breaks down. In learning to read and how to help, we'll share accurate information with other families, other parents, other caregivers, or community members. We'll learn some routines that we can use at home, and we'll reflect on our role, the family role, in developing relationships between home and school, celebrating those strengths in our relationship or between home and school, and making sure we're communicating both to school and from school to home, and lifting barriers or issues that might arise. So go ahead and take out your scrap paper and jot your answer yes or no. I can tell the difference between myths and facts. I can share about routines that are proven to work or have strong evidence. Great. Keep your scrap paper handy because we'll use that as we go forward. This is our agenda for today. We'll take a look at what we already know about literacy. We'll review some myths and facts. We'll discuss some big ideas that you might be hearing educators talk about or hear from your teacher at school. some routines that can be used to help, and we'll keep reflecting on our role in building family partnership, how to use some helpful resources, and next steps. So take a look at the following myths and facts. Take your paper out, and for each number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just jot down whether you think that statement is a myth or a fact. If you answered that each of these is a fact, you are correct. So let's take a minute and think about family partnership together. So a while back, Mapp and Bergman in 2019 described family partnership like this: as a dual capacity building framework for family and school partnerships that are built on mutual trust, linked to learning and development for kids, built on strengths. They're culturally responsive and respectful, collaborative and interactive, where educators are empowered to connect family engagement to learning and development, engage families as co-creators, and honor family funds of knowledge or expertise, and create welcoming cultures. So when we think about family partnership, there are definite advantages. So when we have solid, positive, strength-based, constructive family partnerships, we can see impacts on attendance, on our social and behavior and academics. We know it takes everyone working together to create the impact that we want to see. And ultimately, we want to collaborate to ensure that kids have successful literacy experiences across the disciplines throughout their school day and in and out of school. On your scrap paper, go ahead and jot down one word to describe your own experience in learning to read. Now jot down one aspiration or hope that you have for your child as they learn to read. If you are not an immediate parent, please think about your grandchild, your niece, your nephew, your cousin, whoever that family member is to you. All right, keep that scrap paper with you. Let's talk about some of the big ideas. The first one that you might hear is the simple view of reading. And educators might mention the simple view of reading, or you might hear someone talking about that. What that basically means is that in order to get to reading comprehension, or in order to get the meaning of the text that we read, we have to have two things, and those two things are multiplied by each other. So if you think of this as a multiplication formula, it takes both to get to reading comprehension, or the ability to extract and construct meaning from text. We've got to be able to read words accurately and quickly. So the words that we see on a page, we have to be able to translate that word from print into speech. And we have to decode that word in order to do so. So word recognition and decoding is multiplied by language comprehension. And language comprehension is the idea that we get the meaning of spoken language. We understand what's being spoken about. So the ability to extract and construct meaning from spoken language. We get spoken language. It takes both of those things, the ability to read words accurately and quickly, and the ability to extract and construct meaning from spoken language, to extract and construct meaning from text. Or to say it in a simpler way, we've got to be able to take that word from print to speech. We've got to know it accurately. We've got to know it quickly. And we've got to be able to get the meaning of the language we hear around us in order to read words on a page and get the meaning of the text that we're reading. When you filled out your own word that you would describe your own reading, you may have connected with one of these examples. So let's break these down a little bit. When we look at that word recognition and decoding, and again, that's being able to look at that printed word and translate it into speech accurately and quickly, as if by sight. If we have trouble doing that, and we have a 0 here, that we don't yet have that skill, and we multiply that by language comprehension, which we said was getting the meaning of spoken language. If we have trouble with both of those, because this is a multiplication fact, 0 times 0 is always 0. If we have that difficulty with word recognition, translating that word from print to speech accurately and fluently, and we multiply that times we do have an ability to get the meaning of spoken language, which is language comprehension. We're still not able to get to reading comprehension because we've got to be able to read the words that we see in print. And 0 times 1 is 0. So if we have this ability with word recognition and decoding, we can see that word in print. We can take that word dog and translate it from print to speech to dog. And if we don't have the language comprehension where we get and we understand the meaning of spoken language, then our reading comprehension is still 0 because it takes both. If we have that ability to translate that word from print to speech, and we have that ability to get the meaning of spoken language, then we're able to look at the words on the page and get the meaning of that text that we've read. So go ahead and take out your scrap paper and look at the two scenarios, number 1 and number 2. First, Annabelle struggles to recognize words in speech, or in print, but she can access meaning from spoken language. Would Annabelle be able to understand what she reads? Yes or no? Why? Go ahead and jot your answer. All right, number 2. Leroy struggles with the meaning of spoken language, but can recognize words in print. Would Leroy be able to understand what he reads? Yes or no? And why? All right, taking a look at your answers, you might notice that both kids have one without the other. And we said, with a simple view of reading, it takes both. So it takes both word recognition and language comprehension to get to reading comprehension. So neither of the kids would be able to understand what they've read because they don't have both parts. Let's go ahead and look at this learning progression. This is another thing you might hear educators talking about. So let's break this down. What's involved in the learning process? In early grades, children need to understand the words they hear and the sounds in those words, as well as how to manipulate the sounds in the words. They start to learn about how written letters represent spoken words. And as they progress to 3rd grade and beyond, language comprehension is being developed by understanding vocabulary, developing background knowledge, and other higher order cognitive skills, things like verbal reasoning and comprehension. The goal is to help children move from being a novice reader to a more skilled reader. Let's break that down a little bit more. So when we look at the reading rope, we can see different sections broken down a little bit further. When you look at the reading rope by Scarborough in 2001, you can see areas where reading breaks down under language comprehension or extracting meaning from spoken language. You can then also see where reading breaks down under word recognition or reading accurately and fluently, reading words accurately and fluently. Remember, it takes skills in both to get to accurate and fluent reading and comprehending of text. When we talk about background knowledge, that if we look at the top under language comprehension, we're really talking about pre-existing facts, ideas. So if you've been to a baseball game, you know some things about baseball. So you have some background knowledge about what's happening with one team standing around the bases with a pitcher and a catcher and another team at bat. If you have some vocabulary, that really gets at the knowledge or how much we know and remember word meanings. So if you know what a pitcher is, you can see in your mind a person standing on the pitcher's mound and winding up to throw the ball. So you have that idea of pitching, and you have that one mental model of pitching. You might also have other ones. So when we say pitcher, you might have other definitions of pitcher that comes to mind as well. So we can talk about all those meanings of the word pitcher. We might have words that link to each other like that. But vocabulary also involves being precise. So am I thinking about the right word when I think about pitcher? Or is there a different word that makes more sense? It also means how many words we know. So do we have lots and lots of words in our vocabulary? That gets to breadth. When we talk about language structures, which is the 3rd box down under language comprehension, we're talking about these big ideas around syntax, which is the order of the words. So sometimes syntax can be really simple, like see, spot, run. So we have our We have see and we have spot and we have run. So who? It's Spot. What is he doing? He's running. And what are we doing? We're watching him. So very simple to break down. But we have other sentences that might have a verb and a noun that are very far apart from each other. Or it might be a very complex sentence that has a semicolon in it or multiple commas in it. And so sometimes the structure of our language can impact our understanding, or the order of the words can impact our understanding. Semantics gets into different meanings. And so that's just another way to think about language structure is by meanings. When we get to verbal reasoning, we could talk about things like inference and metaphor. So when we get to verbal reasoning, we're really looking at using our best thinking to make connections. So it may not be directly stated in text, but because of our prior experience or because of our thinking about our prior experience, we're able to make some connections. Or we're able to come up with an analogy or a metaphor to describe something. Those are all examples of verbal reasoning. When we think about literacy knowledge, we're thinking about print concepts, for example, reading from left to right, or genres, which might be something like narrative or story is one type of reading that we'll do, or informational text. So that's all factual. It's got facts, it's got figures, it's got things that are based on fact, not on a beginning, a middle, or an arc and an ending. We can also see some places where reading breaks down under word recognition. So we've got to be able to have phonological awareness, meaning syllables. We've got to have our phonemes, so we know that there are sounds, and we've got our sounds, and we know what those sounds are. We're able to produce those. We have to learn that there are letters or graphemes that connect to different sounds. We've got to be able to make those connections and have that spelling sound correspondence. When we have these things, we can also get to that sight recognition of familiar words. So as those skills build across the language comprehension side and across the word recognition side, as they become more accurate, more fluent, more automatic, we grow in our skilled reading. So fluent execution and coordination of our language comprehension and word recognition, leading to reading comprehension. But at each of these steps, things can break down as well. So let's start with that language comprehension side. When we talk about background knowledge, we're talking pre-existing knowledge and facts. Here's an example. So an example might be things like, when I say the following words, what comes to mind for you? So when I say things like T-line or stone or house, what comes to mind for you? Go ahead and jot that on your scrap paper. All right. So you may have said, hey, that sounds like architecture to me. That sounds like, an architect is using stone and building a house and is looking at the lines and how things line up within the house. And if you said that, that would be a really good guess. What we're thinking of and what we're intending to talk about is the sport of curling. And when you hear those words, things like button, T-line, stone, or house, you know, if you are familiar with the sport and you have the background knowledge, you know that this is the sport of curling. Maybe you saw those on the Olympics. You'd also have to have the background knowledge of the sport of curling in order to identify the context and the vocabulary. So having the vocabulary like a T-line is a line that runs parallel to the back line and the hog line and passes through the center of the house. Let's take a look. So you might have all that information, but to understand and comprehend, you'd need to know what a back line is. So here's our back line. You'd need to know what a hog line is. So here's our hog line. They're parallel to each other. You'd have to know what a T line is. Where's that T line? Here it is. It's perpendicular to the back line and the hog line. And you'd have to know that that T line is a line that runs from something to something. So when you have some of that background knowledge, you have some of that vocabulary, it's much easier to understand than if you don't. So we need to build that background knowledge and build that vocabulary so that we can understand. And when you think about vocabulary, really talking about the knowledge of meanings of words and our memory for the meanings of those words. So when you decided maybe that you were thinking that T-line stone and house was something to do with architecture, you were kind of using your verbal reasoning to understand and reason to solve the problem of what are we talking about when we use those words. You might use inference, you might use metaphor. Those are examples of verbal reasoning as well. You might infer that this is about architecture based on the vocabulary words that you're seeing. It also takes literacy knowledge when we're talking about language comprehension. So things like print concepts or reading from left to right is one example of that. Genre, or are we talking about an informational text, which is facts and figures, or a story, which is narrative? So places where reading breaks down can also be involved with word recognition. So when we're talking about word recognition, we're getting into phonological awareness, or this is that spoken words are made up of individual sound parts. Decoding or translating a word from print into speech, and sight recognition, where we're recognizing words accurately and quickly as if by sight. In your resources, you have a couple of videos from Holly Lane. And go ahead in your resources, pull up that resource document, and go ahead and navigate over to the two videos by Holly Lane. Holly Lane is the director of the University of Florida Literacy Initiative, or UFLY. And she does a great job with pronouncing vowels, pronouncing consonants, so that you can see how we want to pronounce them to reduce confusion for kids. Go ahead, stop the recording and navigate on over and watch those two videos. As you listen to the videos, think about how you say the sound and the sounds that you hear in the video. Jot down any differences. Which ones? As you listen to the consonants, think about how you say those sounds. Go ahead and turn off your volume and say the sounds for each of them. One misstep when we teach the different sounds can really impact learning. So go ahead, take time to peruse those two videos and think about how you say those sounds and how they're said by Holly. What you see on the left are the different examples that we use when teaching sounds, or that your child's teacher uses when teaching sounds. So you'll see an example of the sound like ah, and we'll say ah, but then we'll talk about what's happening with the mouth, where the lips are, what's happening with the tongue, where the sound is coming from, and what we're feeling inside of our mouth. So you can see with the sound ah, our mouth is open. Our tongue is a little bit kind of in the middle of our mouth. And you can see that our key word there is apple. That's where apple, the ah in apple, makes a solid sound without interference by neighboring sounds. One of the things that happens when we're teaching is that sometimes we can add a schwa. And what we mean by a schwa is it's kind of an So instead of, if you look on the right under consonant sounds, instead of saying b, we're saying b. Or instead of saying k, we're saying k. Or instead of d, we're saying d. Or g, we might say g. Or j, we might say j. Or p, we might say p. So you can hear that extra sound. This is confusing. It's confusing where we hear that extra sound there, and it makes it very difficult to blend those sounds together if we have that schwa or that in the way that we're teaching kids to say those sounds. So when we have clear and accurate pronunciation of vowel and consonant sounds, it helps remove that confusion, and it makes blending sounds easier to do, which is a skill that kids really need to have for reading to be successful. So go ahead, if you haven't already, and take your time listening to those two videos and compare what you hear to what you say. As we move forward, there are letters like A, M, S, and T, and they're immediately blendable. And we want to have kids starting to blend right away. So what do we mean when we say blending and segmenting? So blending and segmenting are also places where reading breaks down. When we say blend, we mean putting sound together. So for example, math. What did you hear? Right, Matt. Let's try another one. Sat. What did you hear? Right, sat. Great job. So you just did blending. Now, when we segment, we're pulling sounds apart. So it would sound like this. Mat. This is mat. What's the first sound in mat? Good job. That's the first sound in mat. What's the next sound in mat? Ah, right. That's the next sound in mat. What's the last sound in mat? T. Right. That's the last sound in mat. Mat. Go ahead and look at the resources and the bookmarks, and you can see some great routines for doing that at home with your kids. Here's an example. Here's our blending routine. So when we're blending and we're not looking at letters on a page, we're doing this auditorily, and we're doing this based on the picture of the can or the picture of the sun. It might sound like this. How does this word start? K. Yes, that's right. K. What's the next sound? Ah. That's right. The next sound is ah. What's that last sound? Right. The last sound is Put that together. What's the word? Can. Great job. That's the word can. So let's look at the next one. Sun. How does this word start? S. What's the next sound? Right. What's the last sound? Put it together. Sun. What's the word? Sun. Exactly. So that's a blending routine that you can use. Phoneme grapheme correspondence can also be a place where reading breaks down. The big idea here is the alphabetic principle. So you can see that we have an alphabet arc, and we can use this alphabet arc to help develop and reinforce that alphabetic principle, which is getting towards sound and symbol correspondence. So when we look at the symbol here for B, we know that that connects to, or we look at F, we know it connects to F. If we look at M, we know that connects to M. So there are different ways to use this alphabet arc. And if you're curious about seeing different ways, you can go to the Florida Center for Reading Research, which is on your resource page. Sometimes you can use a singing alphabet song. You can name letters and sounds. You can identify sounds. You can hear sounds, listen to the sound, find the letter, listen to the word, find the letters in the word. And it reinforces that development of connecting that phoneme grapheme correspondence or that letter sound correspondence. So one of the big ideas here is that when we teach kids to talk about the different letters, sometimes we'll say things like, oh, the one with the ball and the stick. And when we say that, we can really cause some confusion because sounds can be represented by more than one letter. And a lot of those have a ball and a stick. So it can be very, very confusing. So we want to be very precise and avoid saying that in our language. We know that something like when we think about I, then we know that I can be the letter I, it can be Y, and it can be IGH. So when we think about that, we think about the sound, that sound I can be spelled in many different ways and have many different graphemes that represent that sound. So when we get to phonics or when we're talking about word recognition, we're really looking at translating that word from print now to speech. So in this case, a child might be looking at the letters C, A, and T, and we want to have kids decode that. So you can still use the same routine that we used before, where you say, look at the first letter. What is that sound? And the child can look at the print and say, K. What's the next letter? What sound? Ah. What's the last letter? What sound? T. Let's try it together. Put that together. What word? Cat. So when you think about those little routines, they can be used in different ways with text or without. But these are helpful to know as you're just working with your child when you're reading together. When you're encoding, you're translating a word from speech to print. So we look at the cat. We just said the word cat, the picture of the cute little cat. And now we want to take that word cat that we just said based on the picture and translate it to writing the word CAT on a piece of paper. So you can hear these words decoding and encoding, and now you have an idea of the difference. Things can break down in both places. Even harder, if we know our phonemes or our sounds, and if we know our vowels and our consonants, and if we know that there's letter sound correspondence, and we have the alphabetic principle understood, and we are starting to break down words, decode words like cat, the words keep getting harder. So now we're looking at words that have a prefix or the un in the beginning of unreasonable, and they have a suffix, and there we've got a bull at the end. And then we've got that root word reason. So unreasonable. Now we're looking at multisyllabic words where we have to know different syllables. We have to be able to break it down into different word parts. And that gets really complicated too. So for our kids who already have some of the basic skills there are more complex skills to learn, and we continue to learn those as we get older and as we move through content and different types of content. And we run into more prefixes, more suffixes. We call these affixes. So knowing these is really helpful when it comes to breaking down words, and knowing routines is helpful when it comes to breaking down words with many parts. So there are routines in your Google folder and in your resources that can help for before you read together, while you read, and after you read. So for example, you might be talking about a book before you read it. You might look at the cover of the book and talk about what the book might be about. While you're reading, you might ask about letters and sounds and words and ideas, and you might use what's actually in the book to answer those questions. When you're done reading, you might talk about what happened and make those connections to life. So, what did the author mean, and how does that connect to our experiences? You can also use your routine for sounding out words. So, how does that word start? What's the first sound? What's the next sound? What sound comes next? When put that together, and what's the word? So you can see some resources in here as well for the tips for supporting reading skills at home. And you can see some of those resources on the bookmarks. You can see some of those resources in the tips for supporting reading skills at home. If you'd like to see a little bit more, a great place to see examples of how we do these decoding skills is by going to explicitinstruction.org, and you can see some kindergarten decoding videos or first grade decoding videos if you have kids that are those ages. You can also see at the meadowscenter.org, you can also see early grades basic phonics videos and multisyllabic word videos for how can we help? What are those routines we can use when our kids run into difficulty in any of these areas? Go ahead and take a minute and pick one of these videos and go ahead and watch that. So as you look at the videos, as you look at the resources that are available for you, you can also think a little bit about how to help at school. So when you have a relationship with your teacher or your child's team or staff at school, a big idea here is in creating trusting relationships. Being able to communicate information to and receive information from school. And when something comes up, to be able to raise that to school. Asking lots of questions, giving input. You might partner with teachers or school teams to look at data, to look at graphs, at goals, at outcomes, at action plans. And when staff involves you in doing that, it can be beneficial for everyone in the partnership. You might be asked to partner around school improvement or be part of a school leadership team. You might be part of selecting interventions and assessments or learning with other parents. So how to help at school, there's many ways to do it. And the more you can be part of your child's partnership with school, the better. So in that electronic Google folder, you'll have review resources and routines for sounds, blending, and alphabet arcs. You've got those tips for supporting reading skills at home, how to have conversations before, during, and after reading, how to break sentences into words, words into syllables, how to sound out words, how to model reading accurately and fluently, and then connecting to resources like bookmarks, how to help kids at home, Meadow Center videos, etc. One of the things you also have is a student profile, and this is from the National Center on Improving Literacy, but it's a great language and learn literacy profile on your child that you can fill out and you can share with school. So things like, who is your child? What do they like to do? What do they dislike? What are the language and literacy strengths? What are their challenges? What are their successes, supports, needs, and goals? So it's a way to form a conversation about your child with the educators in your circle. So with your blank piece of paper, go ahead and jot down a couple answers to this scenario. So here it is. You're leaving a professional learning event or a training on literacy. You run into another parent, Mrs. Williams, who's coming into the school to pick up her child from volleyball practice. As you talk with Mrs. Williams, she asks about the training that you went to. She says, I know nothing about teaching reading. I just can't help at home. What might you say to Mrs. Williams based on your learning tonight to reinforce the family-school partnership and the importance of family routines at home? Go ahead and stop your video and start when you're ready. So as you look at the routines that are in the electronic Google folder, think about which routines you might use when you read with your child at home. How can you use the routine? What's the first step in getting started? What resource might be helpful? How can you increase your homeschool connection and build trusting relationships, share information, and address issues proactively? So today we learned the importance of family partnerships. We shared some places where reading can break down. We shared some of the language that you might hear educators use at school and the routines that can also be used at home, and some ways to build family partnership between home and school. So go ahead, try some of the routines that you find within your resources within the electronic Google folder. Jot down what you intend to do. Think about connecting with other families and learn together. Ask the school or district or ISDs about opportunities for learning as families, for partnership with teams on something like the school leadership team, or for co-creation. Think about visiting the Meadows Center, helping kids learn and at-home videos. Go ahead and try some of the routines and jot down your responses, and when you're ready, go ahead and fill in the blanks. And if you would take your scrap paper back out and just jot your answer, true or false. I can tell the difference between myths and facts. I can share accurate information with families, community members, and I can use a routine at home to help my child. Thank you for joining us today. You're always welcome to come back to the MiMTSS Technical Assistance Center website. You're welcome to join us on our YouTube page and see our other family partnership videos. You're also welcome to come back and join us in the future for other family partnership offerings. The Meadows Center has wonderful resources and videos specifically designed for families as well, and we'd refer you to them as well. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, and we look forward to connecting with you at our next recording.